There is a certain kind of person who suffers quietly, not because they are weak, not because they are foolish, and not because they do not understand what is happening around them. They suffer because they have spent too much of their life trying to be good in a world that often mistakes goodness for permission. You know this person. Maybe you are this person, the one who says yes when the real answer is no. The one who forgives before the pain has even finished moving through their body. The one who listens to everyone, absorbs everything, carries more than they should, and then feels guilty for needing anything back. The one who tells themselves, "It is fine," when it is not fine. The one who stays quiet because speaking honestly would make the room uncomfortable. The one who has learned to smile in situations where something inside them is slowly turning into resentment. And here is the strange part. This person often does not think of themselves as afraid. They think of themselves as kind. They think they are being patient, mature, understanding, compassionate, bigger than the situation, above the pettiness, too good to react, too thoughtful to hurt anyone, too aware to make things harder than they already are. But somewhere beneath all that goodness, something else is happening. A negotiation, a silent bargain with the world. If I am good enough, people will not abandon me. If I am useful enough, people will not replace me. If I am understanding enough, people will eventually understand me. If I never become difficult, no one will have a reason to dislike me. This is where the story begins. Not with evil, not with cruelty, not with manipulation, but with the slow corruption of goodness by fear. Most good people are not destroyed because they care. They are destroyed because they do not know where caring ends and self-erasure begins. They do not know when kindness has become a performance. They do not know when patience has become avoidance. They do not know when forgiveness has become a way of postponing a truth they are terrified to face. And that is why Machiavelli still matters. Not because he was a saint. He was not. Not because he was gentle. He was not. Not because he gave people comforting illusions about human nature. He did the opposite. Machiavelli looked at the world without flinching. He looked at politics, betrayal, ambition, fear, loyalty, image, weakness, and power. And what he saw was not the world as people wished it to be, but the world as it often is when nobody is pretending. That is why people still fear his name, because Machiavelli does not let good people hide inside beautiful explanations. He does not allow kindness to be confused with innocence. He does not allow virtue to be confused with helplessness. He does not allow morality to become an excuse for refusing to understand power. His dark truth about good people is not that they should become bad. It is much worse than that. His dark truth is that good people can become easy to control when their goodness is driven by fear, predictability, and the desperate need to be seen as good. Stay with that thought for a moment, because it cuts deeper than the usual advice. This is not about becoming cold. This is not about becoming selfish. This is not about becoming the kind of person who treats others as objects or plays games with their emotions. That is the childish interpretation of Machiavelli. The real warning is much more uncomfortable. If your goodness depends on approval, then anyone who can withdraw approval can control you. If your kindness depends on being liked, then anyone who threatens to dislike you can move you. If your identity depends on being seen as harmless, then anyone who accuses you of being cruel can make you abandon yourself. This is the prison good people often do not see. They are not always trapped by bad people. Sometimes they are trapped by the image of themselves they cannot afford to lose. They want to be good so badly that they become unable to do the very things goodness sometimes requires. To speak plainly, to refuse exploitation, to protect what is sacred, to disappoint people who benefit from their silence, to let others misunderstand them without collapsing into explanation. And because they cannot do these things, their goodness becomes predictable. And what is predictable can be used. A person who always forgives can be injured again. A person who always understands can be neglected again. A person who always says yes can be burdened again. A person who cannot bear to be disliked can be governed by anyone willing to call them selfish. This is not because goodness is weak. Goodness is not weak. Real goodness is one of the hardest things in the world. It requires discipline. It requires clarity. It requires a mind strong enough to see cruelty without becoming cruel, and a heart strong enough to remain humane without becoming naive. But what many people call goodness is not always goodness. Sometimes it is fear with manners. Sometimes it is anxiety wearing the mask of compassion. Sometimes it is a child's old survival strategy, living inside an adult body, still trying to earn safety by becoming easy to love. Think about how early this begins. A child learns very quickly which version of themselves gets warmth and which version creates tension. The quiet version is praised. The agreeable version is easier. The child who does not ask for too much, does not push back, does not make adults uncomfortable, often receives the message that love is connected to being manageable. So the child adapts. They learn to read moods. They learn to soften their voice. They learn to swallow anger before it becomes visible. They learn to apologize before they understand what they did wrong. They learn that peace often means disappearing a little. And years later, as an adult, they call this personality. They say, "I am just a nice person." But maybe part of that niceness was once a strategy. Maybe part of it was learned in rooms where being honest cost too much. Maybe part of it was formed in the moment they realized that being difficult could make love feel uncertain. This does not make them fake. It makes them human. But Machiavelli would ask a question most people avoid. Is your goodness free, or is it being governed? That is the question at the center of this story. Because the goal is not to stop being good. The goal is to stop confusing goodness with the fear of becoming unacceptable. And once that distinction becomes clear, something painful begins to happen. You start noticing how often you have called things kindness that were actually fear. You start noticing how often you have called things patience that were actually silence. You start noticing how often you have protected other people's comfort while abandoning your own truth. And then the old story begins to break. Not all at once, but enough that you can no longer pretend you do not see it. Machiavelli was not dangerous because he told people to become evil. He was dangerous because he removed the comfort of pretending evil did not exist. That is a very different thing. Most people know his name only as an insult. To call someone Machiavellian is to suggest that they are manipulative, cold, strategic, willing to sacrifice anything for power. His name has become shorthand for a person without conscience. But this simple version misses the deeper disturbance of his work. Machiavelli's real offense was not that he loved cruelty. His offense was that he described power without pretending virtue automatically wins. And this is exactly why good people need to understand him. Because good people are often raised on a very different story. They are told that if they are honest, honesty will protect them. If they are loyal, loyalty will be returned. If they are kind, kindness will be recognized. If they do the right thing, the world will eventually arrange itself around that rightness. This belief is comforting. It is also incomplete. Machiavelli saw what happens when people with principles enter a world where others are not playing by the same rules. He saw that the honest can be outmaneuvered by the dishonest. The loyal can be used by the ambitious. The merciful can be exploited by those who interpret mercy as weakness. The good can lose, not because goodness is worthless, but because goodness without awareness is defenseless. This is the part many people resist. They want goodness to be enough. They want the moral beauty of an action to guarantee its protection. But human beings do not always respond to moral beauty. They respond to incentives, fear, desire, status, advantage, habit, pressure, and consequence. They respond to what they can get away with. They respond to what is rewarded. They respond to what costs them nothing. This does not mean all people are evil. That would be too simple. It means people are mixed, capable of tenderness and selfishness, capable of loyalty and betrayal, capable of compassion when it is convenient, and cruelty when it benefits them, capable of loving you and still using you, capable of praising your kindness while quietly depending on your inability to refuse. Machiavelli understood something that sentimental morality often hides. A good heart does not cancel another person's self-interest. And if you forget that, your goodness may become the very place where others enter and take control. This is why the first mistake of many good people is not kindness. It is projection. They project their conscience onto others. They assume that because they would feel guilty crossing a certain line, others would feel guilty too. They assume that because they would not exploit someone's softness, others will show the same restraint. They assume that because they would eventually feel ashamed of taking too much, others will eventually stop taking. But some people do not stop because you are hurting. They stop only when there is a boundary, Some people do not recognize your silence as pain. They recognize it as permission. Some people do not interpret your forgiveness as sacred. They interpret it as evidence that there will be no consequence. This is where good people begin to lose power. Not because they are stupid. Often, they see more than they admit. They feel the imbalance. They notice the small disrespect. They hear the tone change. They sense when their generosity is no longer being received with gratitude, but expected as a service. They know, but knowing is not the same as acting. And this is where Machiavelli becomes uncomfortable. He would not ask only, "Are you good?" He would ask, "Can you still act when goodness makes action painful? Can you say no when someone calls your no selfish? Can you leave when someone says, leaving proves you never cared? Can you tell the truth when the truth threatens your image? Can you enforce a boundary without needing the other person to agree that the boundary is fair? Can you be misunderstood without rushing to repair someone's false version of you?" This is where many good people collapse, not at the level of morality, but at the level of image. They are not only trying to do good, they are trying to be seen as good. And the difference matters. The desire to do good can lead to courage. The desire to be seen as good can lead to captivity. Because if your identity depends on being viewed as kind, patient, generous, and harmless, then anyone who threatens that identity has leverage over you. They do not need to defeat you. They only need to suggest that protecting yourself makes you less good. This is why phrases like, "I thought you were better than this," can be so powerful. Or, "You have changed." Or, "I guess you only care about yourself now." Or, "A real friend would understand." Or, "After everything I have been through, you are really going to do this to me?" These words work because they do not attack your body. They attack your self-image. They drag you into an internal courtroom where you stop asking, "Is this person treating me justly?" and start asking, "Am I becoming a bad person?" That shift is the trap, because the moment you feel morally guilty for protecting yourself, you become easier to control. Machiavelli would have recognized this immediately. He understood that power often operates through appearances. People do not merely seek control through force. They seek control through reputation, guilt, fear, dependency, and the stories people tell about themselves. If you believe your goodness depends on never disappointing anyone, then disappointment becomes a weapon against you. If you believe your goodness depends on being endlessly understanding, then confusion becomes a weapon against you. If you believe your goodness depends on never being angry, then your anger becomes something others can shame you out of using, even when that anger is trying to protect something real. But anger is not always evil. Sometimes anger is the part of you that still knows a line has been crossed. The problem is not that good people feel too much anger. Often, they feel it too late, bury it too deeply, and then judge themselves for having it at all. They have been trained to believe that discomfort is a moral failure. So, when something in them says, "This is wrong," they do not immediately listen. They ask whether they are allowed to feel that way. They ask whether the other person meant it. They ask whether they are being too sensitive. They ask whether a better person would let it go. And while they are asking these questions, the pattern continues. This is the dark, practical reality. The world does not exploit goodness first. It exploits predictability. If someone knows you will always explain instead of act, they can keep pretending not to understand. If they know you will always forgive without consequence, they can keep apologizing without changing. If they know you fear being called selfish, they can call every boundary selfish and watch you retreat. Your virtue becomes a map. Your fear becomes a handle. Your identity becomes a leash. And the tragedy is that from the outside, it may still look like goodness. You still appear patient. You still appear kind. You still appear generous. You still appear mature. But internally, something is dying. Not your kindness, your freedom. There is an old image from Machiavelli that explains much of this. The fox and the lion. The fox sees traps. It is subtle, watchful, intelligent. It understands deception. It notices what is hidden beneath words. It can sense when a person is not saying what they mean, when a room is unsafe, when a promise is hollow, when affection is being used as negotiation. The lion is different. The lion does not merely see, it stands, it confronts, it occupies space without apology. It does not beg the trap to become less dangerous. It refuses to step inside it. Machiavelli believed a person who wants to survive in the real world must understand both. The fox without the lion can see everything and still do nothing. The lion without the fox can act boldly and walk straight into destruction. Many good people are foxes without lions. They are deeply perceptive. They know when something is wrong. They can feel the change in someone's energy. They can tell when they are being used. They can sense when a relationship has become one-sided. They can hear the manipulation inside the apology. They can recognize the pattern long before they admit it out loud. But when the moment comes to act, they freeze. They soften the truth. They delay the conversation. They choose the version of events that makes the other person look less responsible. They tell themselves they are being compassionate, but often they are afraid. Afraid of the reaction, afraid of the conflict, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of discovering that the relationship only survived because they never demanded honesty from it. This is where the lion is missing. Not aggression, not cruelty, not domination. The lion is the quiet ability to hold a line when someone tries to make you feel guilty for having one. The lion is the strength to say, "I understand that you are upset, but my answer is still no." The lion is the ability to stop explaining to someone who benefits from not understanding. The lion is the refusal to keep paying for peace with pieces of yourself. But there is a third thing good people need. The mirror. The fox helps you see the trap. The lion helps you escape it. The mirror forces you to admit why you kept walking into it. This is the part people avoid. Because it is easier to talk about how selfish others are than to examine why their selfishness had so much access to you. It is easier to say they used your kindness than to ask why being needed felt so close to being loved. It is easier to blame their manipulation than to admit that some part of you wanted the role they gave you. The rescuer, the patient one, the understanding one, the good one. This is not about blaming the victim. It is about recovering agency. Because as long as the story is only, "They did this to me," you may understand the injury, but not the pattern. The mirror asks harder questions. Why did you stay after you knew? Why did you call it loyalty when it was fear of leaving? Why did you call it forgiveness when you were still resentful? Why did you call it maturity when you were swallowing words your body knew were true? Why did you need them to see you as good, more than you needed, to be honest with yourself? These questions are not gentle, but they are liberating. Because once you can answer them without lying, the pattern begins to lose its power. This is one of Machiavelli's most uncomfortable lessons. Self-knowledge is not optional. A person who does not understand their own fear can be ruled through it. A person who does not understand their own need for approval can be purchased with praise and controlled with criticism. A person who does not understand their own guilt can be moved by anyone willing to sound wounded enough. Good people often believe their purity protects them from manipulation. But purity without self-knowledge is fragile. It does not know its own price. And every person who does not know their price will eventually meet someone who does. This is why the fear of being seen as bad is so dangerous. It makes you negotiable. You begin to trade truth for approval. You trade limits for belonging. You trade clarity for the hope that no one will accuse you of being cruel. But sometimes, doing the right thing will make you look cruel to the person who benefited from you not doing it. Sometimes becoming honest will make you look unkind to people who preferred your silence. Sometimes becoming strong will look like betrayal to those who only knew how to love your compliance. This is the grief of growing up. You discover that goodness does not always feel soft. Sometimes goodness feels like a door closing. Sometimes it feels like a sentence spoken without apology. Sometimes it feels like letting someone be disappointed in you. Sometimes it feels like refusing to rescue a person from the consequences of their own choices. And if you have spent your life equating goodness with being liked, this will feel wrong at first. It may feel like you are becoming colder, but perhaps you are not becoming colder. Perhaps you are becoming less available for misuse. There is a difference. Goodness that has never learned to say no is not yet mature. It is still asking permission to exist. It is still hoping the world will reward it for never becoming inconvenient. But real goodness is not the absence of boundaries. Real goodness requires boundaries because without them, kindness becomes resentment. Think of the person who gives too much and then quietly hates the people they keep giving to. Think of the friend who always says, "It is okay," while keeping a private record of every wound. Think of the partner who never names their needs and then feels unseen by someone who was never asked to see them clearly. This is not pure goodness. This is unspoken bargaining. I will give you everything, and in return, you must notice my sacrifice without me asking. But people rarely honor contracts they never agreed to, so the good person becomes bitter, not because they gave, but because they gave from a place that expected rescue. Machiavelli would cut through the sentimentality. He would say that a person who does not act directly will often be acted upon. A person who refuses to name their terms will live under terms set by others. A person who cannot tolerate conflict will be ruled by those willing to create it. This is not a call to become harsh. It is a call to become clear, because clarity is not cruelty. A boundary is not an attack. A refusal is not a betrayal. A person leaving a pattern that harmed them is not automatically the villain. But the world will not always tell you this. Sometimes the world will punish your clarity before it respects it. And that is when you discover whether your goodness is real, because real goodness can survive being misunderstood. One of the darkest things about good people is that they often protect the wrong thing. They think they are protecting peace, but sometimes they are protecting a system that only stays peaceful because they remain silent. They think they are protecting love, but sometimes they are protecting a relationship that depends on them having no needs. They think they are protecting family, but sometimes they are protecting a pattern in which one person's comfort matters more than another person's truth. They think they are protecting harmony, but sometimes harmony is just the name people give to imbalance when the person carrying the weight stops complaining. This is where innocence begins to die. And it is painful, because innocence believes that if you are good, goodness will protect you. It believes that if you do not hurt others, others will hesitate before hurting you. It believes that if you are patient enough, fair enough, gentle enough, and understanding enough, reality will eventually become fair in return. Innocence is goodness before it understands power. Real goodness begins after innocence dies. That sentence may sound harsh, but it is not an attack on kindness. It is a defense of kindness, because kindness that depends on illusion cannot survive reality. Sooner or later, it turns into disappointment, then bitterness, then quiet contempt, then exhaustion, then the strange emptiness of a person who did everything right according to the rules they were given, only to discover the rules were incomplete. This is why so many good people reach a moment where they feel betrayed not only by others, but by life itself. They think, I tried, I cared, I gave people chances, I treated others better than I was treated. Why did it not work? And the answer is not that goodness is meaningless. The answer is that goodness is not a substitute for discernment. You can be kind and still choose carefully. You can be forgiving and still not return. You can be generous and still notice who only appears when they need something. You can be compassionate and still refuse to be emotionally blackmailed. You can understand why someone became the way they are and still decide they do not get unlimited access to you. That last part matters. Good people often confuse explanation with permission. They think if they understand the wound behind someone's behavior, they must tolerate the behavior. They think empathy means endless access. They think compassion means lowering the cost of another person's cruelty because that person has also suffered. But suffering does not make someone safe. Pain explains people. It does not excuse everything they do. Machiavelli would have understood this because he understood that motives matter, but consequences matter too. A person may have a tragic reason for harming you, but the harm still happens. A person may be wounded, but if their wound becomes a weapon, you are not morally required to stand still and bleed. This is where many good people lose themselves. They see the child inside the person who hurts them. They see the fear, the insecurity, the old pain. And because they can see it, they feel responsible for it. But seeing someone's wound does not make you their healer. And understanding their darkness does not require you to live inside it. The approval trap becomes especially dangerous here. Because when good people finally begin to protect themselves, others may not respond with gratitude. They may respond with accusation. You are not the same anymore. You used to be kinder. You are becoming selfish. You have changed. And maybe you have. Maybe you have stopped calling fear kindness. Maybe you have stopped making yourself small enough for others to avoid responsibility. Maybe you have stopped confusing peace with the absence of your own voice. Maybe you have begun to understand that a relationship where only one person is allowed to be wounded is not love. It is an arrangement. This is not an easy transformation. It feels like grief because you are not only losing illusions about others, you are losing illusions about yourself. You may discover that some of your goodness was not as free as you thought. Some of it was a plea. Some of it was a performance. Some of it was a way of saying, "Please do not leave me. Please do not hate me. Please do not make me feel like I am bad." This realization can hurt, but it is also the beginning of adulthood. Not the adulthood of age, but the adulthood of the soul. The moment you stop asking goodness to protect you from being disliked. The moment you stop using virtue as a way to avoid conflict. The moment you realize that being good does not require being available to everyone's interpretation of you. There is a kind of freedom that begins when you can be falsely accused and remain steady. When someone says, "You are selfish," and you do not immediately hand them control of your conscience. When someone says, "You are hurting me," and you can care without automatically surrendering. When someone says, "I thought you were good," and you can quietly think, "Perhaps your idea of good required me to abandon myself." This is not arrogance. It is discernment. It is the difference between being unkind and being unwilling to be used. But it takes practice. A lifetime of automatic self-abandonment does not disappear because you heard one hard truth. The body still reacts. The old guilt still rises. The child inside you still believes that love may be withdrawn if you become inconvenient. So the work is not dramatic. It is not a sudden transformation into someone hard and untouchable. It begins in small moments. You pause before saying yes. You notice the fear behind your apology. You let silence exist after your no. You stop over-explaining to people who have already decided not to understand. You ask yourself, am I doing this from love or from fear? And sometimes, the honest answer is fear. That is not failure. That is the mirror doing its work. Because once fear is named, it loses the power to pretend it is virtue. This is the point where Machiavelli's warning becomes strangely merciful. He is not telling you to kill your goodness. He is telling you to stop leaving it unguarded. A city with no walls may call itself peaceful, but it is also defenseless. A heart with no boundaries may call itself loving, but it is also exposed to anyone who knows how to enter without respect. Walls are not hatred. Boundaries are not cruelty. Discernment is not cynicism. They are the structures that allow goodness to remain good, instead of becoming exhaustion, resentment, and quiet despair. The tragedy is not that good people become strong. The tragedy is that many wait until they are broken before they allow themselves strength. So, what is Machiavelli's dark truth about good people? It is not that goodness is foolish. It is not that kindness is useless. It is not that morality is a weakness. The dark truth is that goodness becomes vulnerable when it refuses to understand the world it lives in. Good people do not need to become bad, but they do need to become less governable. Less governable by guilt. Less governable by praise. Less governable by the fear of being misunderstood. Less governable by the image of themselves as endlessly patient, endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly safe for others to disappoint. A good person who cannot disappoint anyone is not free. A good person who cannot be disliked is not free. A good person who cannot leave a situation that violates them is not free. A good person who needs the person harming them to agree that they are allowed to protect themselves is not free. And this is the part that changes everything. Freedom does not always feel good at first. Sometimes freedom feels like guilt. Sometimes it feels like loneliness. Sometimes it feels like being misrepresented by people who benefited from the old version of you. Sometimes it feels like standing in a room where everyone expected you to fold, and instead, you remain still. That stillness is the beginning of power, not power over others, power over yourself, the power to act from your values instead of your anxiety, the power to choose kindness without being trapped by it, the power to forgive without becoming available for the same wound, the power to care without becoming responsible for everyone's emotional consequences. This is mature goodness. It is quieter than performance. It does not need applause. It does not keep score in secret. It does not give in order to be rescued later. It does not confuse being needed with being loved. It does not collapse when someone calls it selfish. It does not rush to prove innocence to people committed to misunderstanding it. Mature goodness is not soft because it has never seen darkness. It is soft because it has seen darkness and refused to become it. But it is not blind. It knows that some people will take as much as they are allowed to take. It knows that some apologies are strategies, not transformations. It knows that some relationships survive only because one person keeps absorbing the truth. It knows that some people call you good only while your goodness serves them. And still, it chooses not to become cruel. That is the difference. Naive goodness says, I will be kind because everyone deserves access to me. Mature goodness says, I will be kind, but access to me requires responsibility. Naive goodness says, if I forgive, things will change. Mature goodness says, I can forgive and still require evidence of change. Naive goodness says, if I explain myself clearly enough, they will understand. Mature goodness says, some people understand perfectly. They simply do not benefit from admitting it. Naive goodness says, I must not hurt anyone. Mature goodness says, I must not betray what is true just to protect someone from the consequences of their own actions. This is not a small shift. It is the death of a whole identity. The identity of the endlessly good person, the harmless person, the person who can always be counted on to absorb the tension, the person who will always make it easier for everyone else, the person who will carry the emotional debt of the room so no one else has to feel uncomfortable. When that identity dies, some people around you will mourn it, not because they loved you more then, but because you were easier to use then. This is why strength often feels like betrayal before it feels like freedom. You are not only changing your behavior, you are breaking contracts you never consciously signed. The contract that said your needs come last. The contract that said being loved requires being easy. The contract that said your anger is dangerous, but other people's comfort is sacred. The contract that said goodness means never making anyone face themselves. Machiavelli would tell you that every contract has power inside it. Even silent ones, especially silent ones. And if you never examine them, you will live under them while calling it character. So the question is not, how do I stop being good? That is the wrong question. The question is, where has my goodness stopped being free? Where has kindness become fear? Where has loyalty become self-abandonment? Where has forgiveness become avoidance? Where has patience become silence? Where has peace become the name of a cage? You do not answer these questions once. You answer them every time life asks for your old pattern. Every time someone expects your automatic yes. Every time someone uses your empathy to escape accountability. Every time someone calls your boundary cruelty because your lack of boundaries once benefited them. Every time you feel the old guilt rising and have to decide whether guilt is telling you the truth or merely repeating an old lesson. And if this has made you uncomfortable, that is not a bad sign. Some truths do not comfort us immediately. Some truths first remove the lie we were using for comfort. Machiavelli's warning was never that you should abandon goodness. It was that goodness without power, self-knowledge, and the courage to be disliked becomes one of the easiest things in the world to exploit. So be good, but do not be easy to govern through your goodness. Be kind, but do not make kindness a door with no lock. Be forgiving, but do not make forgiveness a guarantee of renewed access. Be compassionate, but do not use compassion to excuse your own disappearance. Be loyal, but not to the version of yourself that learned to survive by having no edges. And when someone is disappointed that you are no longer as controllable as you once were, let them be disappointed. Their disappointment is not always evidence that you have done wrong. Sometimes it is evidence that you have stopped participating in your own erasure. Machiavelli's darkest truth about good people is this: if your goodness can be used to control you, then it is not yet freedom. It is still fear wearing a beautiful name. And somewhere, deep down, beneath the guilt, beneath the old training, beneath the need to be understood by everyone, you already know the difference. So here is the question worth leaving with: not whether you are a good person, but whether your goodness belongs to you. And if this story forced you to see a part of yourself you have been avoiding, say it honestly. Where in your life has goodness become fear? And what would change if, for the first time, you allowed yourself to be good without being governed?